Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And today we're talking about Rare. Not Rare Games, but Rare, the studio.
Yeah. Not games that are hard to find, although some of their old games are hard to find. We're talking about Rare Ltd, the video game studio that started a very, very long time ago. And now they still exist, but in a slightly different capacity, I think. But when I think about the games that made me, like the games that made me a gamer, right? I'm generally talking about like Super Nintendo games and early Nintendo 64 games. And oftentimes I'll talk about Banjo-Kazooie. And when we're talking my top 5 games, that one trades places with Ocarina of Time for number 1. I can't decide between them. But I really, really love that game. But there are also some Super Nintendo games that made me a gamer too, because I got my Super Nintendo for what I think was my 6th birthday, so that would have been April 1996. Sadly, only a few months before the Nintendo 64 would come out. But because this was so late into the Super Nintendo lifespan, they were starting to pack in more games besides just Super Mario World. My parents got me a Super Nintendo packed in with Donkey Kong Country, and my whole world changed. Did you play Donkey Kong Country back in the day?
Oh, I've played so much Donkey Kong Country. I even played it a little bit like 6 months ago because it's on the Switch Online thing. And I just played it one day for fun, and I'm like, this game is
Do they
great.
have all 3 of them?
They do.
Wow. Oh, man,
Yeah.
I love those games. I played so much Donkey Kong Country, and I actually never owned a proper Super Nintendo copy of Super Mario World because I got my SNES so late in the game. But it was the first game that I ever beat without a cheat device, mostly because my Game Genie did not work on my Donkey Kong Country game. And it didn't just not work. Like when I flipped the switch to turn the cheats on, the whole game just got garbled and was an unplayable mess, and not even in a fun way. And so I just couldn't use my Game Genie on my copy of Donkey Kong Country. So I had to beat it legit the first time.
Wow, look at you getting forced to play games legitimately. Thanks a lot, Rare.
Thanks a lot, Rare. But that Christmas, or maybe it was a year later, I think it must have been Christmas 96, I received both Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3 because they came out one after another. So Donkey Kong Country was 94, 2 was 95, 3 was 96. So I think 3 must have been a very new game then when I got it. But I loved all those games. Just totally loved them all. The second one narrowly ekes out my favorite Donkey Kong Country game, mostly because of the pirate aesthetic and the music. All the Donkey Kong Country games have great music, but DKC 2 is the peak.
I think I would agree with you there. That DKC 2 is peak Donkey Kong Country.
Sticker Brush Symphony, maybe the greatest video game song of all time.
Maybe. It might be.
Maybe. Anyway, going into the Nintendo 64 era, I, of course, played tons of Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong 64, and when I was at my friends' houses, I would play I would play GoldenEye 007, just like every other kid in the 90s, and it had to be at my friends' houses because my parents wouldn't let me play teen-rated games before I was 13.
Not even with paintball mode turned on?
No, it didn't make a difference. If the rating said T, my parents didn't want to hear about it. If I was not of age, it was not happening.
Good for them for using the rating system that was put in place exactly as intended.
Right. And as far as my parents were concerned, like paintball mode, what's the difference? You're still shooting each other with guns. Who cares if it makes a paint mark on the wall, you know? They also wouldn't have let me buy a paintball gun when I was a kid, so that would have been right out too. My parents are not fans of shooting people, which is, pretty good. I'm generally
pretty solid
in agreement
parents.
with them. Yeah.
Hey, I don't want to say something strong, but my parents are not fans of shooting people, okay? Just want to get that across.
Not in favor of shooting people. We never owned guns. We weren't allowed to buy gun-shaped things. I had a Nerf gun, but it was like you only got to play with it like every so often. I didn't just have it whenever I wanted it. I had to like sort of earn the ability to shoot my little brother with a Nerf gun, I guess.
I feel like Nerf got around that by making guns that looked really weird. I had a gun. I still have it, actually. I have a Nerf gun that looks like a snake. Like it pops up like a cobra and it shoots out of its snake's mouth. Oh, it's pretty sick. Cool. Yeah, I saved that. I was like, this is a cool toy. I'm keeping it. And I'm 33 and I'm glad I kept it. Let me tell you that much.
Man, in another life where we did more than just video game histories, I would love to do a history of Nerf.
Oh, so Nerf is so cool. Yeah, Nerf still slaps. Everyone knows that.
Yeah, definitely. Anyway, but talking about those Rare games, of course, because today I want to talk a bit about a studio that is near and dear to me, a studio called Rare Ltd. I think they made some of the best games in the 90s and early 2000s and was really one of the few companies, in my opinion, to create games on the same level that Nintendo was doing for their systems. Because it always seems like when Nintendo has a system out, they're creating games on a level that is just above every other company. And then lots of other companies made good games, but none of them came close to what Nintendo would make for their own consoles, except for Rare, I think. And I'm sure somebody can dig up an example of other companies too, but it just seemed like in the 90s and early 2000s, Rare could not miss. Just really crushing it on all fronts. And they made a lot more games than just Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong Country, though. Even though they were huge in the 90s, their history stretches all the way back to the early 80s, when they were also making smash hit games, but not just for Nintendo consoles right away. But before we get into the history of Rare Limited, do you have any other Rare games in your past that you loved, Mike? We talked about Donkey Kong. Is there anything else that you played a lot of? Did you have Battletoads?
I mean, I never played Battletoads, and I never called GameStop asking for Battletoads, even though I should have. But also, I keep forgetting that GoldenEye is a Rare game.
Yep.
I don't know why I forget that. I mean, it says it right when you boot it up, but yeah, I played so much GoldenEye. And does that mean in Perfect Dark is also Rare?
It is, yeah.
And I am a huge proponent of the original Perfect Dark for N64. It is the hill I will die on because I love that game so much. The laptop gun, the gun that you can like see through walls with. Oh, It's so fun. It's such a ridiculous game too. I love it so much.
Wonderful,
I might be one of the only people excited for this Perfect Dark. What is it? What do they call it? They call it a quadruple A studio that Microsoft is doing for a Perfect Dark title. Have you heard about this news?
I heard there was a new Perfect Dark coming. Is Rare not making it?
No, it's done by this quadruple A studio that they're making. That's like, they're calling it, the budget is just crazy, and it's going to be a brand new Perfect Dark game, and everyone's surprised by it. I'm pretty sure that's what I've heard through the grapevine, although I could be wrong on that. I definitely know that Microsoft is making that.
All right. Putting our eggs in the Perfect Dark basket.
So, we're not a news podcast. Yeah, we're a history podcast. So if I get the news wrong, sorry, everybody.
Okay, but before they were Rare Limited, they were a small company called Ultimate Play the Game. And there's a little bit of shenanigans that happens here as to why they changed their name. But this was game development in the early 80s, so of course it was basically just a scrappy group of nerds making video games and selling them. Not unlike the early days of id Software that we discussed months ago now, I guess. But Ultimate Play the Game was founded by brothers Chris and Tim Stamper, along with their friend John Lathbury and Carol Ward, who would later marry Tim Stamper. Just before Ultimate Play the Game, the Stamper brothers had worked for various arcade companies, making games and then getting paid by those companies. They were like freelance game designers because in those days you could make a game in like a month and sell it and be done with it. But this being the 80s and the early days of arcades and computer gaming, they soon realized that really it was just them making the games, and they could probably make a lot more money if they made the games for themselves instead of for other companies, so they set out on their own. They started Ultimate Play the Game in a town called Ashby de la Zouch, which is a town in the county of Leicestershire, England. I think I said that right, Leicestershire.
I have never heard of Ashby de la Zouch, but it is my new favorite phrase.
Yeah, it's a very small town.
So many hyphens.
Very small county. Yeah. It's like, this must be like really old English or something.
Yeah.
But the location is especially important, I think, because in 1982, you'll recall, was the great video game crash of the early 80s, where home consoles were so oversaturated with garbage games that consumers lost confidence, and video games basically disappeared overnight as if they were a fad, never to come back. But over in Europe, and England specifically, home consoles never quite caught on as hard as they had in the US and Japan. What did catch on, though, in those areas were home computers that were productivity and school devices that also happened to play games. I bet more games were played on home computers than anything else, but I have no statistics to back that up, so I guess we'll never know. Like, people were playing games more than they were actually doing work, I think, on home computers. It's like people bought computers, like, convincing themselves they'd do work on them, and then they just played games on them. That's what I think happened.
Who didn't love Math Blaster? Okay, it was a great game.
Yeah, and there were a lot of games that could go, you could say they were work, but they were also games where you could say they were learning, right? And that was much more popular on computers than it was on home consoles. But anyway, because home computers didn't crash the way that consoles did, gaming actually flourished in regions where computers were the most popular way to play games. So founding a home computer game company in England in 1982 was the perfect time to capitalize on home computers for video games, when the competition isn't as stiff and gamers are hungry for the next great experience. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on Ultimate Play the Game, but here's the TLDR of their story. So they released their first game, Jetpack, for the ZX Spectrum, ZX Spectrum, which was later ported to the BBC Micro and Commodore VIC-20 systems. According to Wikipedia, the game sold 300,000 copies in a world where there were only 1 million ZX Spectrums in existence. So 30% of all ZX Spectrum owners had a copy of Jetpack, which is pretty good penetration if you ask me, especially considering it was a home computer, not a home video gaming device.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that is really, really well done, Ultimate Play of the game. So they also released Lunar Jetman, the sequel to Jetpack, and a game called Saber Wolf, which was a game with a character that would return in later Rare games, or at least a reference to this character would return in later Rare games. Saber Wolf was kind of funny because they sold it for $9.95 like pounds sterling instead of ZX Spectrum standard of $5.95. Gosh, games are so cheap. $10 for a game, or I don't know what the exchange rate was back then, I guess, but that seems pretty cheap. But most games were $5.95. But they thought that if people paid more for the game, they'd be less likely to give copies away because piracy was a big thing. It still is. I mean, piracy has always been a thing for computer games, but it was especially a problem back then. And so they thought maybe if we make people pay more for it, they'll be less likely to give it away because they'll see it as like something they paid a lot of money for that they don't just want to give other people. Which is kind of like an interesting social form of anti-piracy. I don't think there's any data on whether or not it worked at all, but they sold a lot of games, so even so, they made almost double their money on each copy anyway. So even if it was the same amount of piracy, they still made more money. Saberwolf received 2 sequels, the latter of which would be done from an isometric viewpoint, which is one of the first games to use that camera style. They also delayed the release of that game because they thought it would cannibalize older game sales. They didn't think the public was ready for such an increase in quality. And Rare has a history of doing this kind of stuff, of pushing the envelope of what you can do on a system. And they were like, we can't put out this isometric Saberwolf game because it's too new. People will never want to buy our older games ever again, so we need to put some time between it. I think that's really funny.
That is funny. I also just love the phrase, they didn't think the public was ready for such an increase in quality. They're not ready for better things. They're not ready yet.
Nope, they're just not ready. Let's hang on to this one. They made several other games in this style, and they were really solidifying themselves as a premier developer for the ZX Spectrum. By this time, there was a lot of interest being expressed in buying out the studio, and another name started showing up in the credits for Ultimate Play the Game games, Rare Ltd. Rare Ltd was a company that was set up by the Stamper brothers that could develop for Ultimate Play the Game, but not be a part of any takeovers or buyouts from other companies. So they were like, people want to buy this Ultimate Play the Game company from us. Well, what if we form another company, call it Rare, work at that company that is like contracted to UPTG, and then when another company buys Ultimate Play the Game, we will still have Rare, and we'll still be able to like make our own games and do our own stuff, I guess, was sort of the thing. They were just going to like take the money and run, I guess. I'm sort of making that up. Like, I don't know what the thought process was there. But that seems like it could be plausible.
Right. That sounds right to me. I think you're right there. That's very smart by them. Smart moves, you know?
Yeah. So in 1985, it was announced that the Stampers had sold Ultimate Play the Game to a company called US Gold, who continued to release games under that brand name. But without the Stamper brothers and the magic that made Ultimate Play the Game so great, they just weren't great games. And the good name that was Ultimate Play the Game was no more. They released their last Saberwolf sequel in 1987, and after that, it was RIP for Ultimate Play the Game. And so this be a lesson to you. If you're buying a game studio in the 80s, and it's run by like just 2 people or just a few people, you don't just want their name, you want their talent too. So figure out a way to retain them as the people working on the games for you, because you can't just put out more games under their name and expect them to do well.
Definitely. Yeah, you hear that, 80s time travelers listening to this podcast? When you go back.
Yeah. If you go back,
do it the right way.
Don't make the same mistake US Gold did. But the Stamper brothers didn't stop making games. They had quietly been developing for the Famicom, which was a strange console they'd imported from Japan, made by some company that had some arcade success called Nintendo. They were enamored with the Famicom, which was released as the NES in markets outside of Japan, and they realized that this was the future of gaming. Besides, the ZX Spectrum was really only popular in the UK, and if they wanted to go bigger, they needed to start developing for systems that were more popular around the world. They reversed engineered the NES themselves and learned the intricacies of the console. This was like back when I guess that was a possible thing that a single company could do. So that's when they decided to sell Ultimate Play the Game to US Gold, because they knew they were on their way out of developing games for the Spectrum. They were like, the NES is the future, and I guess we have to start a new company to do that. I don't know why
That's very visionary of them. That's good that they could see that far ahead, you know? Stamper Brothers know what they're doing.
Yep. So Nintendo had thought that reverse engineering the NES was impossible. They developed the 10NES lockout chip that was basically impervious to unlicensed software development. Well, that turned out to not be true by many different companies. Tengen or Atari was one that also reverse engineered it. Basically, all these early copy protection things that or lockout things that Nintendo and Sega did in the early days of their consoles, they were all figured out by other companies and basically rendered useless. But the NES had this, and it hadn't been broken yet. And the Stamper Brothers figured it out, and they took some game samples to Kyoto to meet with Nintendo. Nintendo was so impressed by the quality of the samples presented to them that they actually gave Rare an unlimited budget to develop as many games as they wanted for the NES, which was unheard of at the time. Because remember, in the early days of the NES, Nintendo kept an iron grip on the publication of games for the NES as a way to try to prevent the 1982 crash from ever happening again. Part of what they did was to limit individual developers and publishers from publishing more than 5 games per year. So to lift this restriction for Rare showed an enormous amount of confidence in the team there. It was not unwarranted, that's for sure, because they were a great developer. So let's talk about some of the games that Rare made for the NES. The first game that Rare released on the NES was Slalom, a downhill skiing game that they'd also released previously on the Nintendo Versus system, which was a set of 2-player competitive arcade cabinets that sort of came out a little bit before the NES did, I think. They're powered by mostly NES hardware, but they kind of had they had like 2 screens and you could compete against each other. I think we've talked about them on the show before because I told Mike they used to have one at Silverwood in Idaho, and I think you said you'd never been to Silverwood before or something like that?
And what's funny is I was just talking to some friends like about this summer going to Silverwood. Like I might make the trip.
Man.
As like, 10 years later than I probably should have gone, I'm going to go, I think. Because they got a new roller coaster.
They did, huh?
And I'm going to check out this arcade and see if they have weird old game stuff there.
I don't know if that arcade even still exists.
I mean, it could. But the problem is in the time of COVID, I feel like an arcade would not be a good choice. But then again,
it's also Idaho. So
Idaho, yes, I was going to say Idaho doesn't care. So maybe because I love the idea of going to a theme park that's like kind of not a main theme park, like not a Disney or a Six Flags, and seeing if they have an ancient arcade with really old systems in it. And so I will do it, and I will report back to the podcast. Okay,
would love to hear. Last I saw it, it was in the area where you could go and buy like pizza and pretzels, and they do magic shows there and stuff. Well, so if it's still there, let me know.
I'm going to spend a lot of time there, so that's good. Just in pizza alone. So
yeah, it's probably not very good pizza, but anyway, you'll have a great time. Welcome to Codex, a history of like
obscure theme parks.
Minor theme parks in eastern Idaho. Anyway, the Rare wasn't owned by Nintendo at this point in time, so they were free to pursue other contracts with other publishing companies. And so they spent the next few years putting out games for Acclaim, High Tech Expressions, and Game Tech. They put out a lot of games, but here are a few of the hits. RC Pro-Am, which was a racing game featuring RC cars, a Wheel of Fortune licensed game, a Jeopardy licensed game. They did a few different licensed games for Game Tech. So, 10 years later when they did GoldenEye, it was not their first licensed game that they'd ever done. So I'm assuming they picked up those contracts from publishers that offered them pretty good money because a licensed game is generally like slam dunk. We're going to make some money on this.
I'm curious about the business of this. So they're getting money from Nintendo being like, hey, make games for us. And they're also getting money from these publishers.
Yeah. So I'm assuming the way it works is that they're getting money from Nintendo to make games for Nintendo to publish. And they're doing all kinds of revenue sharing there, but then they're also getting money from other publishers who want them to make games for Nintendo platforms. At the end of the day, Nintendo's really winning because they make money off of every game sold on the NES, no matter who publishes it.
Yeah, and by these publishers going through Rare, Nintendo knows it's going to be good.
Right.
That's interesting. This is a very weird time. We've talked about this a lot, but this is a very weird time for consoles, I feel like, because they're kind of trying to figure out what to do after the whole crash.
Yeah, and it's like, how much control should we exert over the market? Because you could argue that Nintendo putting the seal of quality on things and like really controlling who can put games out on their console meant that there was a lot less garbage possibility than was for the 2600, the Atari 2600, which just had it was a free for all. Like there were no restrictions on anything, and so there was just a lot of garbage put out. And eventually, it was so hard for a consumer to wade through the garbage that they wouldn't even buy the good games, and they just stopped buying games altogether.
Yeah, this is kind of goes to something that's not really history, but I feel like I want to talk about the Steam store and their back and forth flip-flopping of how they're going to police their own store is something that would be very interesting we could talk about in a future episode.
Yeah.
Because they've done stuff, whether it's like games that are inappropriate or that are societally like taboo, or even just getting all the stuff that's just bad off their store, like poorly made games that are just clear money grabs. Like that would be something I would want to talk about in a future episode, and I will add it to the list.
Yeah, I think Valve has to put a lot of effort into curation and how they present games, because there's a lot of garbage on Steam. But if you're depending on how the thing is recommending games to you, you don't see a lot of it, and that's sort of
that is true too. You got to search.
So they do generally a pretty good job.
You got to search some real obscure areas of the internet to find that garbage. Okay.
Yep. But hey, if you want to buy the garbage, they'll take your money, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
All right. But probably the most famous of Rare's games on the NES was Battletoads.
We're here now. Yeah, Battletoads.
We made it. On its surface, it looks like a straight-up ripoff of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It was a side-scrolling beat-em-up. It looks a lot like Turtles in Time, that sort of style of game. It was a side-scrolling beat-em-up. It was really well done, but perhaps the thing that Battletoads games were most famous for were their level of difficulty. I think it was a really fun co-op game, too, although playing co-op mode often made parts of the game more difficult since you'd have to, like, time your jumps at the same time. It does stuff like that. I think there's also friendly fire, so you have to, like, avoid punching your friends.
Gosh, this is just brutal.
Yeah, they were very hard. One level of Battletoads early on is especially known for its difficulty. It's the hover bike level. And this is where, like, players who play Battletoads get their first taste of, like, oh, this is the kind of game I'm playing here. Because the first couple of levels are, I don't want to say they're easy, but they're manageable. Like, you can get through them, you know? But once you get to that hover bike level, the difficulty spikes huge. I
feel like the hover bike level might be the only excuse we have to actually swearing on this podcast. I almost swore on this podcast just now, you know, because you mentioned the hover bike level. I hate it so much.
The stupid hover bike level.
It is such poop.
Such garbage.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I wanted to say another word.
But something that Battletoads did really well was consistently varying the gameplay, and the first time this happens is on the hoverbike level. So the premise is simple. You get on a hoverbike, and you hurtle yourself to the right side of the screen while dodging the obstacles that come your way. It's very simple in premise, but it's very difficult in practice because you get almost zero notice as to where the obstacles are going to be. You do have enough time to react, but the level is really long, and there's a pretty good chance you can't react for that long. And of course, you have to start the whole thing over if you fail.
Oh, I forgot the length of the level, too. It is.
Yeah.
I've watched people play this level like the way it's intended, and I'm like, how can you focus that long? Yeah. It's really a test of endurance almost, too.
It is. Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, though, the obstacles never change. They don't change, like, their location. So, in fact, much of the game is like this. So you're not given much notice as to where you're going to have to react to something, but you can memorize everything in the game. So if you've done it a million times, you have the game memorized, it's super easy. But it's super hard if you don't have it memorized. So a lot of the really good Battletoads players don't find a challenge in the game anymore because they just have the whole game memorized, and so they just do it, you know? It's not they don't have to constantly react and change to different things happening. So it's just a crazy game.
I feel like the first Dark Souls bosses are that way too. You kind of like memorize the patterns and you memorize the timing, and then you can beat it later on, I think. I mean, those are two very different games, but of the same kind of idea, you know.
And the traps, especially in like Demon Souls, are like, you don't really see them coming, but they're always there. So if you have them memorized, then you know where they're going to be.
Yep.
But people did compare Demon Souls and Dark Souls in the early days to NES games of like, that's the level of difficulty we're talking about here, is just like, I need to memorize this game because you're not meant to complete it. Like, you're meant to, if you finish this game, it means you're a true master of the game. Whereas most games these days, like, if you're mildly competent at it, you will be able to finish the story. And I like that. But
I love that too. I'm fine with being mildly competent.
Right. Me too. Fine with being mildly competent.
I'm gonna put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah. Battletoads, of course, is on the NES, so there's only a max of 2 players. But when I played this game on an emulator in college, and maybe I've told this story on the podcast before, but I played it on an emulator with a bunch of friends in my dorm room, and we'd turn it into a 3-player game. 2 players to play, you know, the Toads, and one to be in charge of saving and loading save states, because you got to be able to strategically save and load those save states, and be able to juggle like 4 or 5 different save states going on, because if you make a bad one, then that could be worse than not having one at all if you like accidentally save right before you die or something like that. So we had a lot of fun, and we were able to finish the game because of that. But boy, we would not have finished it without save states.
Yeah, you gotta have those save states.
Yeah, was it cheating? Yeah, probably. But we also got to see the terrible ending after only a few hours, so it is not worth it. I have a video of us like seeing the ending, and we must have done it at like 3 a.m, and just like the silence in the room when the ending comes up, of how disappointed we are is it's pretty funny.
I need to see this video.
I'll see if I can dig it up again.
All right.
But Rare made a couple more sequels to Battletoads. They made a Game Boy game, they made a crossover game with Trade West's Double Dragon franchise, and they made a Super Nintendo game called Battletoads in Battle Maniacs. They also did an arcade game in 1994, and the franchise would go dormant until just a couple years ago when a newer Battletoads game on Game Pass came out, which we were just talking about. We still haven't played, but we should. They really found a hit with Battletoads, and they put out new entries in the series on Game Boy, Super Nintendo, Genesis, Mega Drive. There were also games on the Master System, the Amiga, and the Game Gear. For much of the early 90s, Rare was the Battletoads company. They put out a few other games here and there, but it was really just Battletoads. Like, just on every console you can imagine, it was all Battletoads. But in 1994, Rare would do something besides Battletoads. And this goes alongside what Mike's been talking about lately with Street Fighter. So after Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat had come out, fighting games were like the hot new thing. They were the battle royale of their time, you could say, or the MOBA of the early 2010s. Street Fighter was a classic, of course, and Mortal Kombat had found success at being the realistic, bloody, even more violent alternative. And this was huge in the early 90s because being edgy in the style was totally in fashion, like blood and guts and punching people and stuff.
With a cool game.
Yeah. Mortal Kombat was always on the chopping block when it came to like the government attempting to ban video games. They would show Mortal Kombat and they'd show, a spine getting ripped out of somebody's body or something and be like, see, this is what our children are playing. And I mean, they weren't wrong, but also, did we all get messed up? Yeah, probably. But, it was a different time, the 90s. Anyway, Rare threw their hat into the ring in late 1994 with the arcade release of a game called Killer Instinct, which sounds like a Mortal Kombat ripoff right away. It was a 2D fighting game that drew a lot of inspiration from Mortal Kombat with its graphical style, gratuitous violence, and over-the-top finishing moves. I don't want to get into too much of the gameplay here because I'm sure Mike will cover the innovations that this game made during his fighting game series, which I'm signing you up for now, Mike.
That's fine.
We're going to have to talk about Killer Instinct. Well, one thing that Killer Instinct had done differently than Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat was the art style. So Street Fighter 2 had those like hand-drawn, cartoonish sprites that were common to video games at the time. Mortal Kombat had gone the entirely different direction by digitizing actual photos and videos of actors, which made this like sort of strange, hyper-realistic graphical style that really resonated with fighting game players at the time. It was very cool and very like high-tech. Killer Instinct did like this sort of halfway thing, utilizing the rise of affordable 3D graphics technology that was starting to become useful for video games. Because by this time, Nintendo was starting to talk up its Ultra 64 technology that was set to replace the Super Nintendo, and 3D graphics were like the next big thing. The PlayStation was out, and like some early 3D stuff existed. It wasn't all great, but it was at like this point in time, or well, I guess maybe the PlayStation wasn't out yet in '94 in the US, but I think that's when it came out in Japan. But like 3D graphics were the next thing, like similar to how a few years ago we all were going, VR is the next thing, right?
Yeah, this is going from bits to polygons, if I recall at this time. Right.
So what Rare did for Killer Instinct was model most of the game on 3D equipment and then rasterize those graphics into 2D sprites, kind of like what Mortal Kombat did with real-life photography, but they did it with like CG animation, which created like a really cool art style that made the arcade game appear to be pushing the limits of what was possible with 2D hardware. And it also served as a bit of a preview of what Nintendo's Ultra 64 hardware might be able to offer in just a couple years. In fact, the arcade game was advertised as using Ultra 64 technology, despite doing nothing of the sort. It was really more Super Nintendo in there than Ultra 64. But they were like, yeah, this is what Ultra 64 games are going to look like. Get ready. And this wasn't the last time that Rare utilized this tactic for creating a unique art style for 2D games. And just 1 month after the launch of Killer Instinct in the arcade, Rare would launch a revolutionary title in the latter years of the Super Nintendo, pushing technology toward the future while reviving one of the oldest Nintendo franchises in existence, Donkey Kong Country. So it was right around this time that Nintendo acquired a 25% stake in the company, solidifying its existence as a Nintendo exclusive developer and making it a second-party developer that was incredibly important to the Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64 era of video games for Nintendo specifically. But we will cover those games next time, because while Rare was a super popular video game developer at this point, the Donkey Kong Country series would propel it to superstardom status, like just knocking it out of the park. And during the mid to late 90s, Rare was truly a company that could do no wrong, and it was really good to be a Nintendo fan at the time. But we're going to save that one. We're going to cover that one in a couple of weeks, probably on Codex, a history of video games. Tune in next time as we charge up in the hyperbolic chamber, or I don't know. I didn't watch Dragon Ball Z, so I can't make up the DBZ reference.
I was just letting you go because I was loving it. I'm a big fan of these intense next time endings that we're doing. Like we're a '90s kids cartoon. I'm into it.
Yeah, that's the time period we're in right now. So we need to make sure we keep the hype rolling.
That's right. I actually just put like 8 Tamagotchis on my keychain while you were saying that. So I'm getting into it.
All right, but that's all I got for Rare this week. We'll cover more in the future. But Mike, what have you been playing this week?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I've been playing a lot of games. I mentioned on the Discord, I beat Star Wars Force Unleashed 2, which,
nice.
As far as the Star Wars game goes, I think it's pretty good. Is the story as good as the first Force Unleashed? Probably not. Does it seem like they kind of forced it by making you a clone? Yeah, they really did. But it's fine. It's fine. It's still that power fantasy Jedi stuff that I wanted, and it's good. So I beat that. I also beat Mass Effect Andromeda, as I said a couple weeks ago. I think I mentioned that. And then I also am working on Borderlands 3. So I'm really hitting my backlog. I'm really breaking it down. But last night, with 2 of my buddies, I started the Sea of Thieves, A Pirate's Life content. Have you heard of this? Mm-hmm. This is like their new crossover with Pirates of the Caribbean movie franchises.
What?
Yeah, and it's actually pretty fun. It's like you're almost, I would argue you're definitely like playing the ride, as in it's very simple. Like you're walking through these rooms and they all have different stuff in them, at least in the first mission. It's just like, but it's really fun. And it's that classic ridiculous pirate life comedy, and I really enjoy it. So I had a good time playing it. I've been playing a lot of stuff this week, though. I've been really trying to not only just like move through my old Trello board list, but also try to play some new games with friends, because my friends and I got really sick of Apex Legends. Like we just played it so much, and also the skill gap has gotten really bad. Like I'm old and I have a bad reaction time, and I cannot keep up with these youngins on Apex Legends.
It's tough.
It is. So we kind of stopped playing that, and we chose Sea of Thieves instead. And I got to say, it's very fun because my friends and I can just talk to each other. We're joking around most of the time, or we're making fun of what's happening in the game, because they said dead men tell no tales like at least 30 times in the mission. It's just really funny. But yeah, it's really fun. I recommend it. If you got Game Pass, play through the silly little they call them tall tales, is like the single player content, but you can play it with a friend. It's like co-op. We played it with 3 people. So it was really neat. But yeah, it was really fun. Nice. So what have you been playing this week?
Well, this week, so I played some, literally this morning is about the only gaming I've been doing, for story-driven stuff. Like I played Ratchet & Clank this morning, about an hour and a half, still slowly making my way through that game. But honestly, this last week has been my girlfriend and I getting ready to go see Fast and the Furious 9. So we're watching all of the Fast and Furious movies, including Hobbs and Shaw. So all of my free time this week, outside of like working, has been watching Fast and Furious movies. Which say what you want about those movies, they're fun and I enjoy them. I know they're not good movies. I still have a lot of fun watching them.
I'm gonna need you.
I'm excited for the new one.
You've been doing it when we've been playing games together. You do a very good Dom impression, and I'm gonna need you to say something for the listener is Dom. I'm throwing this on you right now. So you have to do it. You've been doing it, okay? Just say whatever you want. You can say anything you want to, but you just got to do it, okay? You quote the movie.
You don't have to play video games throughout the week when you got family.
It's my favorite thing. It's so silly.
All the family memes online this week have been really good, and I have a feeling that it's like actually the marketing company behind the Fast and Furious, like putting out all these family memes. But hey, you know what? They're crushing it. Good job.
Man, you also told me that my favorite quote from the first Fast and Furious, "It doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile, winning's winning." He actually goes back on that in a later movie. if that's correct.
He goes back on I Live My Life a Quarter Mile at a Time.
Oh, that one. That's another good one.
That's the one. Yeah, in the first movie, he's like, I live my life a quarter mile at a time. That's my terrible Vin Diesel impression.
I think it's really great. I'm a big fan.
And it's like a cheesy line. Yeah, but later on in like another movie, as he's giving some sort of monologue, like narration monologue, he's like, I used to say I live my life a quarter mile at a time. And then he goes on to say something that invalidates that. He doesn't anymore. I don't know, something, but like, you don't need a quarter mile when you have family or something like that.
Something about it always comes back to him having family. Yeah. You don't need to pay your taxes when you have family. Okay, Dom Toretto. You can't just do that.
Those movies are fun. They're not good, but they sure are fun. Man, especially the later ones when they stop trying to be realistic at all and they just really go for it.
Oh yeah,
so good.
I think the one I loved. The last one I saw was Hobbs and Shaw. The last one I saw.
Oh, and that one has the best. It's the best one.
It's so ridiculous. It's when they like latch on to the cars and they're like flinging them over the cliff, and it's so ridiculous.
There's the part where there's like a helicopter is like flying away and The Rock is grabbing onto the helicopter with one arm, and a car that's like on the edge of the cliff somehow with his other arm, and he is not on the ground at all. He has no leverage here, but he is somehow keeping the helicopter from flying away using just the power of his huge muscles, I guess. And I love it. It's great.
Just like Dwayne The Rock Johnson does every single day. I love
That's
it.
right.
So good.
Yeah.
Okay, I know this shouldn't be Codex, A History of Movies, which is what it's sounding like, but I also watched last night Willy's Wonderland, which is the Nicolas Cage Five Nights at Freddy's like plot horror comedy movie. Have you heard of this?
No, you texted me about it, and I was like, I've never heard of this game.
So Nicolas Cage plays the drifter or whatever, or the janitor is his name, and he's hired to go into a like Willy's Wonderland, like a childhood place that is full of haunted animatronics that try to murder him. And what I can only describe is pure ridiculous Nicolas Cage action, and Nicolas Cage has no lines in the entire movie, and that alone should sell it.
He's just silent the whole movie?
Silent the whole movie, and other people are talking to him and he doesn't say anything, and I highly recommend this movie. It is on Hulu. I watched it last night. It's an hour and a half, which is a perfect length for a movie. It's kind of a video game movie because it is like the director and the writers were like, yeah, we based it on Five Nights at Freddy's. Of course we did. Like, it's obvious that it's based on Five Nights at Freddy's. And it is just chef's kiss. I loved it. It's funny. It's silly. It's just that ridiculous, like, it's gore, but it's like animatronic, so it's like oil instead of blood. It's so funny. It's amazing. Highly recommend it. If you haven't watched Willy's Wonderland yet, get on it. And then also watch all the Fast and the Furious movies, so you could also do fun Dom Toretto impressions for Tyler and I. We would love that.
Yep.
Big fans. But we have a couple emails to read, so let me read those. Actually, a few emails.
Okay.
First one is from Ryan, our friend Ryan. And it says, "My dudes," that's the subject line, 3 exclamation points. "I would like to thank you guys for talking about Street Fighter 2 recently. Brought back memories of my oldest brother babysitting me and my brother over the summer of 1991 while he was home from college working at the local arcade, which was called Just for Fun Number 4. Nice. That's awesome. And seeing that machine for the first time and playing it all day long. Let's chat about the real concerns I have. Since my beloved Xbox 360 is almost 16, wow. When will they, the PS3 and the Wii as well, start making appearances on the greatest Jaybird podcast this side of the Mississippi? The old, but not as old as Burger Gramps, Ryan, sent from my Jaybird rotary telephone." I think we've covered like a little bit of Xbox 360 games, but yeah, I think we should cover more. Definitely. That's something also that I know I'm more familiar with, because that was kind of like
me too,
a little bit more modern in my mind is what you could play. But I just want to find a good series that's really like definitive to the 360 or the PS3 or the Wii. I actually kind of wanted to talk maybe about Wii Sports, because that was kind of a weird time, you know?
It really was.
Yeah. And it had a couple games. There's Wii Sports and then like Wii Sports Vacation or something, or Wii
Sports Resort.
Resort, not vacation. Resort. That's correct. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's a great idea, Ryan. So I will throw that on our now infinitely long list that never ends and we barely cross stuff off of. But that's a really good suggestion because we got to talk about those, and I know Ryan's got quite the 360 collection. I see it on there. Do you want to read this email from Shane?
Yeah. Shane says, "Hello, Mike and Tyler. I'm sure you guys already know this, but Stephen L. Kent is releasing The Ultimate History of Video Games Volume 2 near the end of August. Do you guys think you'll use it for the podcast? I loved hearing you two go through the first one. I've included the Amazon link below. Thanks for an awesome show. Keep up the good work, Shane." And then he has a link to the Amazon for Ultimate History of Video Games Volume 2. The answer is, I think we would love to. We love the first book. Would love to go through the second one in a similar fashion. But what do you think, Mike?
Yes. I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to keep it vague.
Okay.
Let's say
intentionally vague?
Intentionally vague. But yes, we will do it, Shane. We will talk about The Ultimate History of Video Games Volume 2. For sure.
Love it.
All right. This last email we're going to read today is from Eric. It's, "Hi, Mike and Tyler. I've been listening to your podcast for about a month or two now, starting from the beginning, and I'm about 10 episodes away from being caught up. I really enjoy listening to your show and how it feels like a discussion with the community that surrounds you. Anyways, I've been playing through Max Payne 3 recently and thought about how I'd love to have the first game remade using the same engine. However, I then remembered the crying baby platforming dream sections, and I immediately lost interest. I hated those. This is Mike talking, not the email, but I despise those sections as well. Do you guys have any old games that you'd love to get remakes of but contain parts so bad it feels like it's not worth it? P.S. I know Tyler was watching his SO play through Last of Us 2, which had a lot of annoyance over the ending. Did you finish it? And if so, spoiler free, what did you think? Eric from Boston." I know you guys like to know where we're from. Thanks again. Thank you, Eric. First response is, yeah, I agree with you that Max Payne, if it is remade, should drop the crying baby platforming, because not only is it weird, like tonally, but it's also really frustrating to you gotta like, there's like blood tracks on the ground. Have you played Max Payne?
No, I haven't.
There's these blood tracks on the ground implying like one dead baby was dragged in this direction, and then there's breaks in the blood path, and you have to jump over it. But the game's a third person cover shooter, so it's not good at jumping. It just doesn't feel good. It's not even cover shooter because it's the first Max Payne. So there's really, I don't recall there being a lot of cover stuff. It's a lot of just bullet time and things like that. So it feels really weird. So I agree with you there, Eric. But I was actually surprised that Mass Effect Legendary Edition left in the Mako, but they did improve it, right? Didn't they?
Yeah, they changed the handling of it a lot so that it doesn't suck anymore.
That's good, because that's the first red flag I would think of when they did a remake was like, how are they going to deal with the Mako with Mass Effect? But do you have any games you can think of that are like you want to see a remake, but they got to drop something out of it to make it better?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the wolf sections of Twilight Princess, but I don't know if they need to drop them because it's kind of integral to the story. I just didn't like those parts, so I don't know what the best way to deal with that is, because I think they're important story-wise, but I just don't like playing as a wolf in Twilight Princess, so I can't think of anything else.
What about in regards to his question with Last of Us 2?
Oh, Last of Us 2, yes, we did get to the end. We did finish it. I can't remember specifically. I can remember some bits and pieces of the ending, so I should probably watch a refresher or something. But I don't remember being disappointed about it at all. I think I mostly enjoyed it. It maybe wasn't exactly what I kind of had hoped would happen, but I don't think that means it was bad. I think it just means it was different from what I thought was going to happen, which is not bad.
Okay, good.
So,
that was very good.
That
was a spoiler-free. Great job of explaining it, because I haven't played it yet. Okay.
You should. They're great.
I know. Thank you, Eric, for the email. And if you want to email us, you can send us an email at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also join our Discord server. We're on Discord. If you want a link to that, you can email me and I'll send you an invite. Or you can go to my Twitter page at @mecoletta on Twitter, and you can click on the pinned tweet. That is an invite that never expires, and you can just join that. Also, Tyler's on Twitter too, at SneakerElf, ELPH, if you want to hang out with Tyler and talk to him about Rare. I'm sure he'd love it. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. But with that, I think we're done for the day. I don't know what I'm doing next week. This is kind of exciting. I have to look through the episode ideas list and find something that's like kind of on my mind. I have a couple ideas like as to what I want to do on that list already, but I just haven't committed yet. So we'll see what I talk about next week. And Tyler, do you want to say bye to everybody?
Goodbye, everybody.